The gospel this morning is Matthew 24. Yesterday, the cleansing of the temple was in Matthew 21. So, if you are following along from Matthew 21 to the end of the gospel, you'll have read that there's a number of teachings. Jesus gets in trouble with the authorities. All of it leading up to, of course, where we're going at the end of this week. But today's gospel is a little bit different. This is not Jesus in public making it known that he is there, that the Messiah has arrived, that judgment is being passed, that attitudes are going to be exposed. It's not a passage that angers the scribes and the Pharisees. It's a passage for Jesus's inner circle. So let me set it up for a little bit. He's been at the temple. Now, the temple is glorious. It's probably the most beautiful sight for a Hebrew person. Large, ornate, shining in the sun. And Jesus tells them that it's going to be destroyed, all of it, down to rocks. Now, you have to remember, when Matthew is writing, this is the end of the first century. It's not in the time of actual Jesus living. It's decades later. The temple has been destroyed by that point in time in the Jewish-Roman wars around 77, or 70 rather. It's gone. So for the people who are hearing Matthew, it's not hard to imagine the temple being destroyed because it was done in possibly their lifetimes. But for the characters in the gospel, this is shocking news. What do you mean the temple that's been there forever is going to be destroyed? And Jesus elaborates a little bit more when they ask him questions. Now, they're all moved off to the side, and some of Jesus' best teachings are with his inner core of disciples. Now, these are not people who he's picked up along the way. These are people who have mostly been with him from the beginning. So they've seen him being threatened. They have seen him being treated poorly. They've seen him being treated like royalty. They've seen all of this. And they're sitting down and still trying to figure out all of this. Jesus has predicted his death for them. They intellectually know what's going to come, but they probably don't emotionally know what's going to come. And he's trying to tell them what the church is going to be like, what the future is going to be like, what their job is going to be like when he's gone. Because up until then, they've still got him as their buffer. He's still the one that is the focus, not them. So Jesus sits with them and says, earthquakes are going to happen, famines are going to happen, wars are going to happen, and false prophets are going to come and tell you they come in my name and they have answers to everything. Now, that's the crux of it this week, or this particular gospel. False prophets. Now, we're not talking people who come and say they're the Messiah, although that certainly did happen at that time in history. We're talking people who say they are the servants of God, come with a special message, and if you just follow them, give them all your time and attention, give them all your money, they'll give you the path out of this labyrinth we call life. And that was not a first century thing. It's a 21st century thing too. And it's been very disappointing the last week and a half to see Christian leaders, and I put that in quotations, because Jesus called leaders to live their faith, not just get power from their claims. But people willingly saying that God gives special protection against disease if you believe enough, if you follow, if you were part of this one community. It's a lie. And Jesus warned about that over 2,000 years ago. See, the gospel that Jesus wants spread is not putting churches everywhere and having people in power and having all sorts of authority in a community to tell people what to do and what not to do. That's not the gospel. The gospel is what Jesus told us to be, that we're to love God, we're to love each other, and we're to love ourselves. Those three things. That is the core of the gospel. And a few places in the scripture, he actually goes on and expounds upon that, mostly in the Beatitudes, which, if you're following Matthew this year, you would have read earlier in this calendar year. The expanding upon that is, feed the hungry, We should not be having food go to waste in fields and milk being drained out and poured down the banks of the river or into the drain simply because it doesn't make a profit. That is not feeding the hungry. That's not the life Jesus called us to be. It's not about what you can get from your sense of Christianity. It's what you give. So feed the hungry, house the houseless. How many people right now are struggling with safe housing? Those of us who are privileged have the wonderful places to live. We can stay inside, entertain ourselves to no end, but that's not the reality of all of God's world. There are millions of people who don't have that, who see it as a luxury. And we, as God's people, are also responsible for making sure that is available. Take care of the prisoner. Prisoner populations right now are under threat of disease because everybody just wants to see them as criminal and not as humans. That's not the gospel. As we go through Holy Week, we're reminded that being a follower of Jesus is not easy. And when you grow up in North America, when you're in a privileged household, when you have a sense of your own power, where no one is going to insult you for being a Christian, it's really hard to remember that that's not the case of Christians around the world. We have some followers here who are from countries that Christians do face persecution, where there is not a safe place to go and wear your cross. When we're comfortable in our Christianity, we forget that we're not supposed to be. We're supposed to be challenged by our Christianity. We're not supposed to be looking at the world as if, oh well, whatever happens, I'm fine. That's not the gospel. Jesus called for us to share the gospel, and anybody who is a faithful Christian is a disciple. That means someone who is following and learning at the same time. You never shut off your brain when you're a Christian. You can't afford to. Learning what it means to be followers of Christ means we're also doers of Christ's message. And we're going to get crapped on, and people are going to risk their lives, and we're going to get bullied, and we're going to get a bunch of people who say, yeah, well, down the road, they celebrate this guy who all he wants is more airplanes and a bigger mansion. If that's the church, I don't want it. Spoiler note, that's not the church, and I don't want it either. We as Christians have to stand up and live the gospel. And as this passage today tells us, when every corner of the world is living that gospel, that means all the people are fed, all the people are housed, all the children are safe, all the prisoners are taken care of, all the things that Jesus called us to be and do are being done, then the end will start. Do not look for viruses or natural disasters as symbolic of, okay, now the time's up. We don't have to pay attention to anybody else anymore. That's not the point. We are told these things are going to happen. Don't have to like it. And the first century Christians had already experienced some persecution, so they knew what it looked like. Until we are prepared to send the gospel to every corner of the world and everybody live it, we're going to continue to walk the cross with Jesus. It is time now for us to show people what it means to be our faith. A number of years ago, a friend of mine who was raised Christian but doesn't believe, I don't know if she calls herself atheist or not, but she said to me one day in a park, she said, I don't mind you talking about Christianity because you live it. Now, when I heard that, that was not a point of pride for me. That was a point of censor. If I am supposed to be living my faith, then I better live it. I can't just be on video for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes a week or a day and then go off and do whatever I want. That is not the gospel. That's not sharing the gospel. That would make me a really disgusting disciple. That's not who we're about to be. So I challenge you, if you're going to talk about the gospel, live it. Even if you're not going to talk about the gospel, live it. Live it. Because we need to be the disciples, and Jesus deserves no less. So go be the gospel. Even if you're in quarantine, you can still be the gospel.